Hey, Drummerstalk on tour here, Drumland, Terpstra muziek. It's with the greatest pleasure I introduce to you the one and only legendary Sir, Mr. Tommy Aldridge. Welcome to our Drummerstalk table. How do you like the table?
Thank you very much. Oh, well, how can you not like a table that's made from a drum? I mean, it's an awesome table.
How's life treating you?
Very good, thank you. A little busier than, a little jet lag, but no complaints. I'm proud and privileged to be in the great, in the Netherlands. It's awesome. I always love playing and working over here. Very enthusiastic, not only drummers, but, music fans in general.
Can I take you back to like when Tommy Aldridge was like 10, 12 years? What were your dreams? How did a day in your life look like?
When I was 10 or 12.
Were you already playing the drums or were you?
I was as much as a 10 or 12-year-old kid can play, I was trying to teach myself the rudiments at that time. My mom was encouraging. I'm the only musician that you could find in my family tree. And so I think for that reason my mom was helpful, and none of my siblings, I have an older brother, a younger brother, and a younger sister, and to my knowledge there's not another Aldridge or anyone in our family that was in the music business or a musician. Right. So I think because of that my mom was anxious to see how long I would stay with it, So she was supportive, she helped me out. My father, on the other hand, I was a drummer for decades before my father ever knew.
Really?
Yeah, we hid it from him. Yeah, he wasn't a big fan particularly of contemporary music. My dad was a big country music fan.
All right.
Very fundamental person. He figured if you were a musician, especially a rock musician, you were either a drug addict or had questionable sexual preferences, or a combination of both. So. My dear old dad he didn't know about anything until I was making more money than he was.
All right.
And then it was safe to let him know because he could relate on those terms,
Did he show pride later on?
He did later, I think. My father passed away several years ago at 62 at quite a young age. He was an alcoholic and a very sweet man, but he had his struggles,
All right.
Yeah.
But that must be weird to hide this from your father.
Well, it'd be nice if your father can come alongside you. I love my dad. I miss my dad. I wish there were a lot of things because I started touring so early in my career. I was away when I was 17. I was gone, and I kind of rabbit trailed away from your original question, but. It would have been nice to have a father to come up and say, "Yeah, son, go for it, dude. I'm here and with you." On the other hand, the fact that my dad didn't like it was somewhat of an encouragement because anything my dad liked, I didn't like.
Yeah.
So I think I had a lot of friends that I grew up with, and their family just showered them with drums and guitars and stuff, and they ended up not being interested. In my case, I had to really fight and scratch for everything that I got. My mom would help me, but only she would match if I would go out and work and, deliver papers or whatever young boys do to earn money. She would help me, and match that, and I'd buy a snare drum or a bass drum, and slowly built the kit. But at 10 or 12, I was basically trying to teach myself the rudiments.
So have you always been self-taught? Or did
Yes.
you take on lessons?
Not out of choice, and it's not something that I am. It's not a bragging point. It's something that if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't have a mentor or someone really knowledgeable, not someone that I could learn how to play the drums from, but someone that could have guided me and mentored me through the rudimental stage of learning, because that's the language of our instrument. If someone would have kept me really on a straight and narrow path, drum corps, I'd give my left arm right now to have gone through drum corps for 2 years. Because that is just invaluable. It's the language of our instrument, the rudiments. And without those, you're really kind of dead in the water. I mean, from having a wide vocabulary. My vocabulary is very, very narrow. And my power band, consequently, is very narrow. Knowledge is power. And sometimes I feel really, really weak because my knowledge base just isn't as wide as I wished it was. And it's for that reason. I didn't think about anything but drums and drumming. I read drum catalogs. If you looked under my bed, all my buddies had copies of Playboy and stuff like that. I had drum catalogs, you know. I thought maybe I'm a little bit strange, you know. And it was just all about drums and drumming. And all I wanted to do was play. With my mom would come and get me out of I practiced in the shed in the back so my dad couldn't hear the drums, you know. My dad never went in there. Sometimes I would put towels over the drums so I could rehearse when Dad was home from work so he wouldn't hear anything. So that's all I wanted to do. And my mom would come and grab me to come in and eat, and after I'd go right back out there, you know. So it was never about work. It was never about, I just loved doing it. So I wasn't just dedicated and looking at my watch, I need to put in 3 hours on the kit today. It wasn't any of that. I would have put in 6 hours and felt cheated if I couldn't, you know. So it was just, I was just totally occupied by drums and drumming.
Is it Black Oak, Arkansas? Is that the
That
first
was the
real,
first national
gig?
or international band, and I started with them when I was 17.
Yeah.
And it was something. It was I was playing in original bands. We had a little trio, a band called Allie Keith, and we were doing our own music, but we couldn't get arrested. I mean, it was really hard for us to get gigs because disco and there were other styles of music that were much more popular, and the guys that were doing that were the ones that were working, and we had a real tough time finding places to play because we were playing original music and no one wanted to hear it. We weren't in Memphis, we weren't in Nashville, we weren't in New Orleans, we weren't in Atlanta, and those were the three music meccas where I grew up. If you weren't in Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, or New Orleans, there wasn't anything else going on. Well, I was in Mississippi, Florida, you know, and there's just what. And so I was playing in a little bar with that trio, and a gentleman came up to me during a break and gave me his card. He said, "If you ever want to get serious about this business, call this number." Well, his name was Dave Smith. Well, he was a sound guy. He was a PA guy, front of house. It just so happened 2 or 3 weeks later that band split up. So I called him, and I gave him my phone number and stuff, and he gave my phone number to this manager, and it was a manager of Black Oak, Arkansas. They had just signed a deal with Atlantic Records, and they needed a drummer, and they invited me to Memphis to audition. And I was 17 years old, just turned 17, and I drove up to Memphis to audition, and I'm sitting outside in the audition room, and I hear these guys playing, and I knew a couple of them, you know, and they were really good drummers, and I'm thinking, I don't have a chance, you know. And I finally went in. They'd all come out, and they were all, you know, crestfallen because they didn't get the gig, and I went in and played, and I got the gig. Yeah. And I was just really surprised. And a week or so later, when they flew me out to L.A. to start rehearsing, after I started getting to know them, and I asked, well, why did you guys pick me? Because I knew there were guys that they turned away that could play circles around me, really, you know. Not just technically, but just in every way. They were older guys. And all those guys in that band were in their late 20s, early 30s at that time, and I was still just, 17. They said you were different. Your approach was different.
I noticed just now when you played, there's this pocket that you have a high movement, and it almost seems like you hold back a little right before you hit it, and it always strikes me when I had to listen to the southern music. There's always like this pocket in the 2 and 4. It seems slightly later than it might.
A little slouchy.
And can you explain to me why is that geographically set in the South? How
That's a good question, and I've found that about a lot of most European drummers. All of them have good pocket. All you guys have awesome pocket, but it's more on the front edge, and that's a different kind of pocket. To me, it's a little bit more leaning, and I love that. My struggle is always trying to play on the back side, like if I'm listening to a click or a metronome and I'm practicing in my room, trying to stay on the back edge of it. I think John Bonham really personified that. And I mean, he was British, but, continental drummer, but he was a funk dude. John Bonham, I think, was just a really on-fire funk drummer, And I think it's the laid-back mentality of the Allman Brothers and those guys. Those guys, when they're two drummers, the only way you can really keep from flamming, you know, is like just stay way back, you know, and don't beat the guy to the back beat, you know. Just it's just I don't know, a laid back kind of slouchy kind of Southern thing. And I did grow up in the South, and maybe it's from that. But from the day that the first information that I got early on, my mom said, "I'll help you get some drums if you'll go and get some lessons." And that was the best advice, and it's coming from my mom, who knew nothing about music.
After your period with Black Oak, Arkansas, if I understood correctly, there was like this business thing. You were under a contract and couldn't play for a while.
Yeah, I spent a year learning to be a business person.
Exactly my question.
Learning to, even though I was an equal owner in that band, it was a very successful band, not from a conventional sense, but in places where the people that hadn't seen it all and didn't know it all would come and see us because they hadn't seen or known anything like that. It was a weird kind of backdoor kind of approach. It was that kind of music. The singer, he sounded like a dentist drill. It wasn't pleasant. It was awful. It was awful, you know. I was there for 5.5, 6 years. I tried that whole time to get away. That's how awful it was. But anyway, my point is, it became a very successful band eventually. And even though I was an equal member, I was signed to this employment agreement that was owned by the corporation that I also owned an equal share of. So it was really convoluted. I signed things that I owned part of, but I was still just as encumbered by them because there were 4 or 5 other guys that had ownership in that. So when I wanted to leave, they said, "No, you can't go because look at this." And I said, "But that's not fair, I want to go." And then the manager says, "Well, you can go, but you can't play with anyone else." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm going to go anyway." And they said, "Well, we'll have somebody make it where you can't play with anyone else." And I'm thinking, I've never heard anyone threaten somebody. I've never been threatened in my life like that, you know.
Being that young, that's like,
It was scary. It was scary, you know. Someone saying that I thought that I knew, they said, "Well, we're going to hurt you where you can't play anymore." And I said, and it scared me to death. It kept me there for 5.5 years. And this is the honest to God's truth. This is what happened. And so by the time I got ready to leave, there was a lot of money involved. I said, "Keep all the money. I just want to go and play." But no, they wouldn't have it. And so I learned, and part of that was my mistake because I signed things as a young kid, and I was using them as a stepping stone. It's not nice to use people for any reason. And so I paid the price for that. I don't blame those guys, you know. They took advantage of a situation that I participated in by my thinking, well, I'm just going to use these guys for a couple of years, get my foot in the door, and then I'm going to move on. That's not cool to do. So I paid a real high price for that, you know.
So if we do the chronology and talk about every act you play since then, we're going to be sitting here until like
I know, sorry.
But let's have a quick recap. I mean, after Pat Travers, there's Ozzy. And then you went to England.
Actually, not Ozzy. I moved to England when I left Pat. I never even went backstage. At the end of that tour, I had planned to move to London and live there for a while, and that's when I met Gary Moore. On that, yeah, I got a flat in London, and I lived there for a couple of 3 years, and I met Gary. And we worked together. I did a couple of albums for him. It was when I was working with Gary, who was signed to Jet Records, which was owned by Don Arden. Jet Records was owned by Don Arden. Don Arden signed Ozzy to Jet Records. And that's when I met Randy Rhoads. Randy Rhoads came to our rehearsal. He was a big fan of Gary Moore's. And he had just come over to start working with Ozzy. And he and Bob Daisley, the bass player on those two albums, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Mad Record, they came to our rehearsal to meet Gary. And that's when I met Randy. He was coming because he was a huge Gary Moore fan. And so I was living in England at that time, working with Gary and recording and touring and stuff. And it was through that liaison that I ended up getting involved with Ozzy and Randy. And I left Ozzy, and I was was trying to, well, I did a bunch of different project things between, little things that I've done throughout the years, not bands, but just things to keep busy, and just to stay in search of a band or whatever, looking for some opportunity.
Is it in England or back in the States?
I was back in America then, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, during the Aussie thing, in the middle of that, I moved back to the States, and Rudy Sarzo and I worked on a project. We tried to put a band together and seeking a singer and a guitar player. Well, we got real close to that singer and guitar player being John Sykes and David Coverdale, but they wanted us to join them as part of Whitesnake. Yeah, this is before the '87 album, Still Alive. John had all those riffs, I'm hearing all those riffs, and jamming around on that stuff with Sykesy, before the album was ever recorded. But we couldn't come to terms, so Rudy and I kept looking for a singer and a guitar player, and then 6 months later we were not successful in that, and Rudy and I ended up joining with Whitesnake, but then John was gone and Adrian was in, the Dutchman, from Enschede. From Enschede, yeah, down the road, yeah.
What was for you the most fun thing to do? If you look back on this, like let's take the '80s, of all the bands he played in the '80s.
Most fun.
Maybe on a human level or
playing
musical?
with Randy Rhoads was always fun.
All right. Yeah.
He made you he could bring you up to his level just by being in his company. He was a real human being, but and you put that with a real musician, it's kind of like what God intended. You put someone that's like just a really, really nice person that's incredibly gifted, and they kind of just, you benefit just by being in their company. I don't know how to describe it. It's a spiritual thing, It's not just physical. It's attitude and energy and it's physical too, because it's uplifting. I don't know how to describe it. It's like a holy experience being in, and I mean it in a HOLY and a WHOLLY. It covers all the bases, So when you're working with people that are just beautiful, sweet human beings, and then they pick up a guitar and they just scare the hell out of you, Those are almost mutually exclusive, because I know, and some of you've mentioned their names, I know some people that are incredible in their instruments that are just not very nice, It's really hard to work with and stuff, and none of us are perfect, but come on. And Randy was one of those guys, but the most fun probably period of time, it would probably have to be the '87 stuff with Whitesnake. It was like being almost like a film star, because it was MTV and all the video and the radio and video were coming together, and so they're playing your stuff on the radio nonstop, and you look at the top 10 on the Billboard charts, 4 or 5 of those acts are Aerosmith and Whitesnake and rock bands, You don't see any rock bands on the charts anymore. And all that focus and attention was on our genre of music. And you'd come into a city, you'd do 5 nights in LA, you'd go into Chicago and you'd do 5 nights in the stadium, and that stuff doesn't happen anymore, There are very few people that can come in and do that kind of business. And so when you have that kind of almost global focus on a specific genre of music, I mean, people knew when you were in town because they saw you on TV and they heard you on the radio. It was almost like being a film star. Yeah. There were parts of it that were really exciting, but there were parts of it that were scary too. I can imagine how Brad Pitt must feel, When you can't walk down the road without, and you appreciate it. You want to give everyone, the time and stuff, attention, and there's only so much time in a day. From that perspective, from a musical perspective, playing with Travers, that was a lot of fun. We were doing some stuff that other people weren't really doing in America at that time, a trio, and stuff, and it later evolved to get Pat Thrall in on guitar, and kind of made it feel more just fuller, when people were soloing, with a trio, it's hard to pull that kind of stuff off, but you get to play more notes in a trio, which I've always enjoyed playing as many notes as I can get in a bar, I've never been shy to do that. So there's just been different times, I love drums and drumming, and I always have, and I still do. And whenever I get to do that, I get excited. There's been hills and valleys, and that's, if you're up here all the time, where do you go? And that's why you go down here for a little bit and say, oh man, it's nice up there.
That was great. Yeah.
I like it up there, but what gives me the appreciation for up there is down here.
listening to the charts now, there's only like it's either hip hop or it's like dance music, EDM sounds, hardly any real drums. How do you see? How do you look at that development from?
I understand how people could say that. I mean, there was a time when newspapers came out and everyone was sitting around like this with newspapers, and they said newspapers have devastated conversation and social interaction. And now they're saying the same thing about the internet or handheld devices, you know. So, you know, we've been there and done that. There's nothing new, really. They said that about drums and drumming when disco was what, 25, 30 years ago? They said, what's going to happen to drums? All these drum machines are... All the cool sample sounds that are everybody's triggering, and triggering has been around. People thought when triggers came out and pads that this was going to be a thing of the past. Learning the physical aspect. If you want the drum to sound big, you got to hit it harder. If you want it to sound soft, you have to hit it softer. You know, with a pad, you just turn it up or down, you know, and you get all this amazing rebound off of the floor tom, which off of that floor tom, it's very loosely tuned, so you don't get that kind of rebound. You have to work harder. That's reality there. That's like running in quicksand, you know. So if you're playing on pads all the time, you're not going to live up there. You're going to get tired really quick. So those things have come and gone. There's really nothing new. So I don't think Eric Clapton needs to worry. You know, there's these hot guys coming up on guitar, classical guitar. I'm talking about, you know, Segovia playing flamenco. That stuff's not going away. Virgil Donati and these guys are raising the bar with this instrument. Gravity is being defied on a daily basis. What I play up there is like child's play compared to what's going on right now, you know. So I don't worry about that. I remember when Whitesnake, when we were like selling an unholy amount of records, and then grunge came out, and they said, "Oh, it's all over.
It's the end of the guitar." So
it's the end of the guitars. Guitar is dead. You know, well, that was a long time ago, and so we've been there and done that. There's really nothing new on the planet. You know, the same rudiments that these guys are defying gravity with are the same rudiments that Louis Bellson was playing. You know. So that doesn't bother me, you know.
That's century-old.
Cycles. It's all about cycles.
In a normal profession, people stop working around their 65th
Absolutely.
birthday, and you're at 67.
Yeah, just
still hitting it like a monster.
I don't really have to. I still enjoy it. And so that's part of my plan, to scale down and spend more time in my studio at home, try to concentrate a bit more on doing, you know, recording, some more and more recording. I spend so much time away, I turn down a lot. I'm not a session guy, but I get a lot of requests to do drum parts on albums and things, you know, and to try to do more of that, you know. That's been my goal for the last, albeit very unsuccessfully, the last 4 or 5 years.
And is there still something like a bucket list? Things that you dream of doing?
That is my primary bucket list, to still do as much drumming as I can, but while spending more time in one place. That's the top of my bucket list, to enjoy as much drums and drumming as I can, but travel a bit less while doing that. Yeah.
And one final question. This is going to be online, and there's probably also some young kids going to look at this, and they inspired to a career in music. What would you tell them? What would be your pointers for their path to becoming a professional musician? Maybe you can do it on camera.
Sure. I'm not wise enough to really dispense wisdom. Because I'm not really smart. I've just made every mistake you can make, so all I have to do, I learned early on, just don't do that again. It's kind of called trial and error, because I'm not really smart. I've just made all the mistakes, and I just stopped making the same mistakes. Yeah, I remembered the mistakes, yeah. All I can do is, I would strongly urge you to learn the rudiments. Learn all the rudiments. Find someone to mentor you, you know, to help you work your way through the rudiments. And remember them, but practice them with a click. I know all this sounds very boring, but it's so important, you know. Learn the rudiments, practice them with a click, and the only other thing I would suggest is be yourself. You know, if you really want to be a balls to the wall rocker, be a balls to the wall rocker. You know, don't kind of half-ass it. Don't try to be something you're not. You know, and those would be the three things: rudiments, click, be yourself.
Oh yeah, one last question. Could you please sign our beautiful Drummerstalk table?
Absolutely. Thank you. Here.
Find a spot. Thanks so much for your time. And we're out with Drummerstalk on tour, Mr. Tommy Aldridge.